You may or may not have heard about the term digital water, smart water, the Internet of Water, or Water 4.0. What is it and why should we care? But mostly, how can it benefit at-risk communities? So our topic for today is digital water, and our guest is Dr. Fraser McLeod. He's got 20 years experience in water, sustainability, natural resource policy, management and practice. He led the technical development of the Murray-Darling Basin Plan, and is a former executive director of the World Water Council, and also has a PhD in information technology. Don't go away. We'll be right back with the Water Hour, and our conversation is digital water. Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the Water Hour. If you're not yet following us on social media, please do, because if you do, you'll get a notification when we go live. I'm your host, Bridgetti Limbanda from Cape Town in South Africa, and this live stream is brought to you by the South African Water Chamber, BeLive Media, and StreamYard. This is an audience-centric show, so please feel free to comment, ask a question to our panelists. Our panel today comprises of a special guest, Dr. Fraser McLeod, and also from the South African Water Chamber is Benoit Leroy, Professor Hamad, and we're hoping that possibly Fred Platt may or may not join us a bit later. We will see. So with that, gentlemen, welcome to the show. Great to have you here. And Benoit, I'm going to kick off first of all by asking you to just give a brief introduction to our audience about the South African Water Chamber, please.
Thanks, Bridgetti, and welcome, Fraser and Hamad, our usual co-anchor. Yes, to our audience, my name is Benoit Leroy. I'm one of the co-founders of the South African Water Chamber, and we were set up really with the sixth administration of the current presidency to enable dialogue and support and collaboration between the private water sector and the public water sector. Various plans, master plans, national infrastructure plans, and the likes have happened, since that. And our next challenge now is to get it from the policy to implementation, which is more at a local government level, where local government is in semi-paralysis at the moment. But we're going to unlock that. And one of the things we do with the shows during the week is, in actual fact, to raise awareness as to how we can do it. We are in the middle of transitioning from the fourth to the fifth industrial revolution, not the third to the fourth, it's the fourth to the fifth. And we see with our water woes, accentuated by the load shedding, have actually laid bare our water insecurity. So today we'll touch a little bit on some of the tools and the philosophy and the thinking available, because the problems we have are not singular to South Africa. It is Water Week, and water is a global issue. Water is not for free. It falls for free, but it doesn't arrive in your tap for free. So it's one of the problems we have is that, and we believe that we can make it more valuable, more investable, so that we can get water to the 4.2 billion who don't have water and sanitation or dignified services. Thanks, Bridgetti.
Thanks very much for that introduction to the South African Water Chamber. Dr. Fraser McLeod, I'm going to jump right into our conversation about digital water. So can we start off? I'm going to ask you, what is the digital revolution in the water industry? And is it a way to future-proof our access to water? What exactly is it?
Thanks, Bridget. Look, it's always nice to start with the easy questions, because in many ways, digital water is one of those terms that is used. It's available and used in many different ways in different parts of the world. So digital water for many people is really about the type of technologies that water utilities use to measure what is going on at an operational level. So automated leak detection using artificial intelligence or machine learning. It could be simply improving the digital infrastructure, creating a digital twin of your delivery network to understand and optimize the way in which water is being delivered. But digital water is also increasingly being used in the broader spectrum of water resources management, which is very much about using small sensors out in the landscape to measure volumes of water, dam levels, river levels, with telemetry sending the data digitally back to computer systems, right down to a whole range of new technologies relating to water quality sensors. There's some people think that we should be moving towards what they call massive sensorization, which is basically having automated Internet of Things sensors everywhere, right from the tap in your home right through to the level of water in our reservoir. So understanding this massive amount of data that we could theoretically collect. There's also elements of digital water, which is around thinking about the way we manage business processes. So many business processes in the water sector are still quite manually based. They might often be, when you apply for something, you fill in a paper form, for example. So digital water can also just be another way of describing converting manual processes to digital processes. So there's an awful lot of elements in what is called digital water, but it's a useful term to describe the increasing trend towards using digital technology to improve our understanding of the water resource, our management of the water resource, right through to improving the service that we can actually deliver to customers. So in that context, it has a significant role to play, but I'm not sure that it's necessarily, on its own, it's actually going to change the world. It will make the world a better place. But fundamentally, the issue that's at the heart of how we change the way water works is actually a set of policy choices. So digital water or digital technology can help you achieve things, but at the end of the day, it can only help you achieve the things that the policy and the legislation describes that you are actually able to do. So, in some senses, we've got to think about digital water to improve the current situation, but digital technology could actually fundamentally transform the way we think of water at a policy and legislative level if we wanted to go in that direction. Examples would be moving away from a paper-based water license to a fully digital asset that only exists in the cloud or on the blockchain, which you can trade freely or move freely and manage as a purely digital asset. Today, a water license is effectively a piece of paper granted by government. So we've got to think about, as I describe it, as today we're in the world of paper water. Our whole policy and thinking is driven by pieces of paper. So you have a piece of paper that says you have a right to do X, Y, or Z. You have a piece of paper that tells you how much you have to pay. Digital water today and the technologies are being used to effectively what I would describe as creating digital paper. So we're moving from filling in a physical piece of paper to doing it electronically. But you could actually imagine digital water taking us to the next level, which is actually moving towards fully digital assets where everything operates in a digital environment. So you have a very big spectrum, and that is one of the reasons why it's a conversation that has got nuances everywhere in the world, depending on what people are trying to do with it. And obviously, in South African terms, I mean, it's one that is being widely and actively talked about at the moment, as it is everywhere in the world.
Thanks very much for that introduction. Hamant, I'm going to go to you if you don't mind. Do we have the policies in place in South Africa that would enable us to make a shift towards digital water? Is this something that still needs to be worked on and enabled?
Well, Brigitte, as far as I'm aware, I don't think that we have a policy constraint when it comes to digitization. Because digitization, in my view, is a tool. It's an instrument for us to use, as has been indicated by Dr. Fraser, where, it's a performance enhancement tool. It's where we're able to gather data across the entire value chain. For example, I'm not aware that anything precludes for us collecting data from the different catchments in South Africa. The way that we currently go about collecting it historically has been by taking physical samples, right? If and when we do this, in the past we used to do it fairly regularly. It's fallen somewhat out of fashion, but nonetheless, we take the samples, we bring it to the lab, we have it analyzed, and we have data. We know what the water quality is at different points of the catchment, etc. Now, what digitization offers us in that context is the notion of having sensors or other devices that are able to send signals of this very information, through our cell phones, etc. So we don't have to go to the lab and do all of this analysis, take all of that time. Of course, not all of the analysis are now available in terms of sensors, but some of them are. So in terms of the legislative aspects and the policy aspects, I think that there is no constraint in that direction in terms of how we go about accumulating data, how we go about optimizing the performance of our water treatment plants, of our wastewater treatment works, what we do with the national database, and how we can create efficiency around that. That the industry has been slow to adopt these technologies, I think that is something that could be a discussion point at a point in time. And why that is the case, this is a conversation happening all over the world. The water industry in particular has been a very conservative industry, and conservative for particular reasons. If you understand the public health dimensions and the implications around provision of safe water to people, and of course recently with the scare around cholera, etc., you can imagine that the folks that produce water and purify it and operate these plants are conservative by nature historically. That being the case, I think that we could be embracing a lot more technologies for our benefit in order for us to be managing these systems in a better way, and creating value for customers and consumers, and creating dashboards and creating transparency so that the customers and consumers are able to see all of this information, many times on a real-time basis, sometimes, maybe a day or two later, so that you have an enlightened customer base. We're all on the same page. And importantly for me, Dr. Fraser, having been in the utility sector, there's often this notion that what is the one version of the truth when it comes to data? When you speak to operational personnel, when you speak to management, when you're trying to figure what is actually going on, what is the data telling you, then you would encounter, folks around the table saying, are we sure the data is correct? My sense is the data should be different. Now, unless we don't have one version of the truth, which is what digitization is now offering strongly, we're not able to make the right decisions, to pull the right levers in order for us to create beneficiation. So that is my sense around, the huge opportunity that is existing. And I don't think that we have any legislative aspects that are hindering. It's the notion of embracing technology. It's like, some of us who are no longer what they call young water professionals. I wouldn't use the word old, I would use the word seasoned. We are kind of reluctant to change our phones as well these days, right? Just in case we don't know how to operate it as well as the older one. And I think the similar kind of concern and reluctance comes to embracing these so-called, technologies which could be scary and something could go wrong and I could press the wrong button, or maybe the data might just show up that I'm not operating the plant as efficiently as I've been claiming. So there's that concern too. Thanks for the opportunity, Brigitte.
Thank you. Benoit, is there any resistance amongst our water professionals in making the shift to digitization? Where are we in South Africa in the stream of things?
So we're in the same place as the rest of the world. Digitizing in any sector or value chain is highly dependent on buy-in from the people involved in it. And it starts at the top, the bottom, and in the middle simultaneously. And the issue, as Hamantha mentions, transparency and the trust issues and the likes. And you see behind me, I've got blockchain. And I think would like to ask Fraser to talk a little bit about how blockchain can be applied in the trading of water. I'm not talking privatization of water, the trading of water, where we've got an immutable, and Fraser can explain the terminology, an immutable and central point of truth. So it is the truth, and immutable being that it cannot be changed. Doesn't mean you can't progress and the likes. But I think the important part is, if you just like water trading, which is now legal in South Africa, in my mind it always was, and the Concord has verified that. It took us 28 years to get there. But if you look at the trading of water, there's resistance in all countries in the world because it's a human right. It's our food, and food is not free, and food is traded. Crops are traded. Water is the same thing. And yes, it falls on its own, but from there on, it attracts a lot of inputs, and nobody works for free. Not that I'm aware of. So I think maybe Fraser can touch on that, because the water trading issue in South Africa, in actual fact, has affected agriculture, which has taken several tens of billions knocking GDP output in the last 12 months at its lowest confidence levels, below 50 percentage points at the moment. And the main issue has really been the stochastic nature of rainfall, of the management of our dams, and so we've had floods twice in the season that have destroyed crops in various parts of the country. Then we've had drought before that, and people do not know how much water we have, how much we use, how much we share. And I think Fraser can give us a bit of his experiences that, for example, in the Darling Basin in Australia, and I think also in the US, where using blockchain, and also not talking to cryptocurrency necessarily, but blockchain or distributed ledger technology, we were able to address to an extent, that chasm between the public and private sector. We don't trust government and all the likes. And I think it's in the water sector, using blockchain is a very, very new concept. So as Hamantha says, we've got a very conservative sector because of the health implications and the likes, and also there's no way to hide once the truth is there. But it's really the only way to go forward. And it's the fastest growing subsector in the world in water is digitization, which has many facets to it. But I think that the blockchain or distributed ledger technology side of digital water is actually the foundation of overcoming the trust issues, transparency issues, and making sure in the end that everybody gets water, not just some get water, however it's allocated. And enough said.
Thanks very much, Benoit. So if we may switch to you, Fraser, if you don't mind.
You're on mute there, Fraser.
Sorry. No, not at all. I'm quite happy to respond. I mean, in terms of some of the things that both Benoit and Hamantha have said, there's some really interesting questions come up. The first one, just to focus on, is the question of truth. And what is the truth? And it is very interesting when you look around the world, is that it's not just that the water sector is conservative, it's also highly fragmented. There are many different agencies with different responsibilities. And in my experience, every one of those agencies does not particularly trust data that was generated by any of the other agencies. So their point of truth is the data that they collect for themselves. And that data is collected for a specific purpose. But many people want to use data for other things. So there's this whole debate about what constitutes truth. And I would say that right now there are many different points of truth in water. And that is one of the real barriers to overcome in terms of getting people to accept that a piece of data is actually true. But then, as Benoit was saying, one of the interesting technologies that has been emerging in recent years is blockchain technology. And blockchain technology is actually quite interesting as a digital technology. Currently, when an organization wants to implement an IT system, they procure a system, they might even have one custom built, but it is built uniquely for them. It is customized uniquely to do what they want it to do, and it is actually uniquely designed to manage the data that they need to deliver their remit. When you put a piece of data onto the blockchain, the first thing to bear in mind is that the blockchain is not owned by anyone. So it's not controlled by any one of the vested interests around water. So it's simply a place where data can be stored and shared transparently between all of the different parties. But when you put a piece of data onto the blockchain, Benoit used the word immutable. Essentially what that means is when you put a piece of data onto the blockchain, you cannot go back and change it. In water today, people will actually go into their spreadsheets or their databases and they say, oh, there's a mistake, let's go and fix it. So they go and change it. And nobody actually knows, firstly, that there was a mistake, or secondly, that anyone has changed it. So the blockchain actually brings transparency to the data itself. But I would also say is because of that, one of the things that is interesting about blockchain is when you put a piece of data onto the blockchain, you're actually ledgering something much more important. You're ledgering your reputation. In effect, you're saying, this is a piece of data and I am staking my professional reputation behind it to say that it is the best piece of data that I can provide you at this point in time. And if you imagine that you are able to do that from the point of view of thinking about ledgering with clarity and with transparency, all of the water use rights that may exist in a particular location. And if you are then able to record and ledger all of the things like how much water that is possible, you can actually then create markets or trade water. And trading of water is not a particularly unique feature of anywhere in the world. There are many different, both formal and informal water markets all around the world. But essentially what people are doing is basically saying, I have a certain right to use a certain volume of water, and I am looking to share that right, perhaps in return for money, with someone else. And there's a whole range of rules around who can trade what, with whom, when, and so on. And those rules are often broadly very similar in every part of the world, but also have got some local nuances. But one of the interesting things we have found in the context of trading water or looking at water markets, in some parts of Australia, there's a very high degree of frustration with the water markets. It's the most mature water market in the world. They've been trading water in the Murray-Darling Basin since the early 1990s. And last year, the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission actually did a really deep dive into the water markets. And the headline conclusion of their investigation was that the water markets in Australia need reform. They are not fit for purpose because they were actually set up as extensions of water management rules. And they were not really set up as a market as we think of markets today. So there are things like brokers can act for both the buyer and the seller at the same time, which isn't a particularly good thing in a market. But it's got nothing. But if you put these things on the blockchain, you can actually begin to see exactly who is participating in the market, who is actually putting something up for sale. And you can verify that it's real because you can actually go back to the water register held by the department, and you can do a direct call onto there to verify that what is being put up for sale is a real entitlement or is a real water license. And what it actually begins to give you, as I said, is the blockchain effectively ledgers events. Who was participating in the transaction? When did the transaction take place? what was the purpose of the transaction and what value was exchanged. And as soon as you start ledgering those information and actually pushing it into understanding the data that comes in, you can actually create this independent source of truth, which is created by everyone. So it's not a point of truth created by one person. So the water rights owner can actually ledger their water rights. The water resource manager will ledger how much water is actually available and what restrictions are being placed on water, what the water trading rules are, what are the water management areas. You can then actually have participants entering the market, and they may or may not be able to participate because the rules might be restricted as to who can buy and sell water. And the example we like to give is that in Australia, we did some work with an irrigation district with about 2,000 irrigators. And the typical length of time to undertake a water trade was between 60 and 90 days. And the reason it was taking 60 to 90, we reduced the time down to less than 7 by using a ledger. And the reason it was taking so long was there is no single place where you can actually record, find out what price is being paid for water. So therefore you don't know how much to ask for the asset you have, and equally you don't know how much to pay. Secondly, they had no information about who was actually looking to sell water, or even who was in the market to buy water. So they spent about 60 days or more basically phoning all of their friends and all of the people they knew, trying to work out what was actually happening in the marketplace. And we have said, remove that, because people can actually put up bids and offers. It's saying we want to buy or sell water, and you can automatically match those based on the rules. And the reason it took 7 days to actually process a water trade was because the regulator wanted to verify everything. But if we could automate the regulatory rules of water transfer, you could actually use a blockchain to engage in near real-time water trading. And that is something that would be amazing to actually imagine happening. In the United States, for example, water trading at the moment, if you're selling your water right permanently, it can actually take up to 2 to 3 years before that transfer is finally agreed, because of the likelihood that it would have to go through legislative processes and courts and so on to check it. But where you've got very clear rules around water trading, where you've actually set them up, so some parts of the United States, they're creating special mechanisms called water banks, where if you're a member of a water bank, the rules of trading are predetermined. Effectively, approval is automatic. So you could actually have real-time trading of water in those kind of circumstances. And that means if you need some more water, you can go to the marketplace and you can buy it. And you can trade in real water, or you can trade in your long-term right. And we now are seeing different products emerging. So there are people who are buying their water use licenses or selling it. They are renting them, so effectively leasing them for a period of years. They're purchasing real water just for use in this water year from people who have a surplus. We're seeing forward contracts, options contracts emerging. We're seeing, we've actually got in some situations, people are actually buying and selling the part of their right that allows them to store water in a reservoir to carry it over from one year to the next. We're also seeing them starting to sell their delivery capacity, where they have a share in the physical infrastructure for moving water. And the most recent one is obviously in the United States. There's now on the NASDAQ, there is actually a tradable financial derivative, which is based on the Californian water market. So there's all sorts of things emerging around trading. But every instance that you see at the moment, the mechanisms that sit behind it are totally opaque. They're not necessarily consistent. They're not well regulated. And people are deeply frustrated and suspicious of the fact that the existing mechanisms might be open to manipulation and speculation. If you use something like a technology such as blockchain as the basis for these markets, the first thing you do is you remove some of this cloak from around it. You're drawing the curtains back, saying, here is the data, it cannot be changed. So therefore you have a basis upon which you can start engaging in water trade. And you will always know and see who is participating, see what price is being paid. And therefore people can actually manage and benefit from the flexibility that water trading allows them. And it really comes down to a question of how comfortable people are to automate the rules of water trading. And as I said, if we can automate those as smart contracts. So a smart contract is another blockchain term, but it basically means that it's a rule that is placed on the blockchain, and when it's placed there, it becomes immutable. So the rule cannot be changed for one group because it's convenient. That rule will be applied to every single participant consistently in the same way, without fear nor favor. And this is some of the issues that we see in water markets generally, is there is a lot of skepticism about the current structures because the fact that they're totally opaque, they're controlled by a very small group of people, and people suspect they're open to manipulation and speculation. Blockchain effectively removes all of that because it creates a fundamental point of truth that is independent of all of those vested interests. And in that way, they can all share the truth and they can all build the truth together. And in that way, water markets can grow and develop and more people can participate in them, where the rules have been set up to allow water trading to happen.
Thanks very much, and welcome to Fred Platt, the South African Water Chamber Chair. So Fred, if I can pull you into the conversation here on digital water, what are some of the benefits to the business community in South Africa? And I also would like to know, what are some of the benefits to at-risk communities moving into digital water? So if I can start with you, what are some of the benefits to the business community? Fred, we're unable to hear you.
Apologies. Thank you, Brisetti, and thank you very much. Nice to be with you, and also nice to be with you, Dr. McLeod, on this discussion. I think the reality of the matter, and we've on many occasions spoken about the deficit and what we need to spend and what needs to happen in the economy, and we know there's a huge backlog of investment. On the other hand, we also know that there's a huge trust deficit between all the parties involved in this. There's no shortage of money that wants to invest into the water sector in South Africa. There's no shortage of problems. There's no shortage of solutions, but somehow we need to bring all of that together in as you've spoken about, the single point of truth, and into an environment where we can create the necessary governance structures so that all the parties feel confident that engaging in this environment, that they can get value, and that they actually, whatever they're contracting for is going to be, at the end of the day, what they're getting. The second component, to me, is that by placing value, and I know that Benoit has on numerous occasions raised the issue of the value of water, and obviously water has a value at a point, and that value depends on the availability and the quality and what is required and who needs that water. And the moment you can start looking at it within that context and provide an environment where you can provide the water to whoever needs it at that point in time, you then automatically start driving certain behaviors. Because if I see value in the water that I have, and I can monetize that value at any point in time, maybe I won't be wasting it. And maybe it could be more valuable to another person. So for me, the big question is, we know all the the challenges and problems we have in the country. We know that there is a need for the solutions. I think we all pretty much know what the solutions are, but there's a huge mistrust between the communities, between the funders, between government and all of the parties. And how can we use technology and specifically the distributed ledger or blockchain technology to create an environment in which we can get all the parties together to agree on a common set of rules, which can then lead to an outcome. So I see a huge potential for engaging with all the stakeholders around the problems that we have in developing a governance framework, a central point of truth, that can then engage all of the stakeholders in a environment in which once the rules are agreed, they're immutable. I just want to say we've got wonderful plans and policies and documents in the country. Our issue really is around implementation and getting everyone catalyzed towards that. And maybe a question to the panel broadly is, how do we use this technology in order to create that environment that can address the trust deficit and that can add or can determine the true value of water so that we are able to maximize that resource to the benefit of everyone.
Thanks very much for that, Fred. So, Fraser, if I can go back to you again, what are the benefits to the at-risk communities of digital water?
Look, I think the benefits can be significant. I mean, I think one of the first benefits is quite simple. It's simply about transparency. So as soon as you begin shining a light onto exactly what the situation is, people have an improved understanding of their actual situation, and therefore they can begin to have an opportunity to actually begin to make their voice heard more directly, because there's real information that they can actually harness to say, this is the reality of our situation. We're certainly finding in some parts of the world, I mean, many communities are taking a lead and are actually, for example, installing their own networks of water quality sensors to measure the level of pollutants in their local water supply. And they're actually doing it to give them information that they can actually take to the authorities. And with the technologies we're talking about, sensors are now becoming very, very easy to install. They're very small, they're very cheap, so communities can actually take that into their own hands. But at the same time, the more data that there is that people can harness to answer these questions, the greater the opportunity there is for them to actually make a case for change. Because at the end of the day, the reasons there is not water being supplied to one community is getting a better deal than another community is because the way the system works. So what we're effectively talking about is how the data can actually be made available to these communities so that they can harness it to actually drive an agenda for change. And this is one of the reasons why getting data out there becomes so important. Now, we have to bear in mind is that, when we talk about digital water, we're talking massive amounts of data. So we actually have to make the data simple to digest. Hemant talked about, for example, creating simple dashboards that people can just go to see. So on your mobile phone, getting a quick snapshot of what is the current water quality in your community. If you actually had something like that on your mobile phone, it can allow you to start making choices about how you want to engage with water. Is today a good day? In some cities in the world, it's not uncommon where you have the air pollution index on your phone. Now, the reason for that is because obviously people have got many health problems associated with it. Well, imagine if you had on your mobile phone the water quality index for your community today. And you could check it every day and decide on the water availability index in your community today. there's the data that we've got can actually empower people to engage in managing their time to the best effect because they understand what is actually happening. And I think this is one of the fundamental societal changes that we're going through, or that digital technology opens up. In the water sector, we have been very, very dependent on central authorities having responsibility to deliver water for us. And therefore, we're actually starting to see data and digital technology empowering communities to take charge of their own situation, or more charge of their own situation. So you will certainly find in many countries, you'll find many of the indigenous groups. There's one of the things it's not about water, but there is a really wonderful documentary that was produced called The Territory, which is actually looking at an indigenous population in the Amazon jungle whose forest reserve was being encroached on by farmers. And this particular community actually started using GPS, drones, databases, social media, and all of these different technologies to, first of all, understand exactly where the problems were, but secondly, to give them powerful backup to their communication to the authorities to explain that there are problems. It really is fascinating to see how a community who are really not connected to technology at all have embraced the digital world because it gives them a set of tools that they simply do not have access to today. And it becomes possible for them to really drive their own agenda and drive change. And as Hamad said, it may well create a debate about which piece of data is true or not, but at least that's a debate that we're not even having today. So in some senses, it's a step forward if we actually get to the point where we've got two pieces of data that don't correspond. It actually opens up the debate to saying, which one is right? Which one are we going to accept? And all of a sudden, that is a conversation that, as I said, we're not in any way able to have today because the data is not transparent, it's not public, it's not shared. Therefore, it's impossible to engage in those kind of conversations. And that frustration, that pent-up frustration, is perhaps strongest in underserved communities. But at the same time, it is also being felt in every country in the world right at the moment. People are beginning to question more and more why the water system works the way it does, and how do we as a community actually drive an agenda that might be different or drive change. And this is really where the transformative power of digital water comes in. Yes, it can help improve the management of water, but if we can actually get it into the hands of the community, then it can actually drive a fundamentally different process around what we're trying to achieve with water, who has it, who hasn't. And you can just imagine many, many ideas of what could go out there in terms of the information that we could share with people if only we had the data was easily accessible, transparent, trusted. And trust will grow the more we can share. It's interesting that if you don't share something, you're not going to be trusted. If you share everything, quite interestingly, there's also not a lot of trust because people question, why are they sharing everything? So trust is a very strange thing in this space, but we have to be careful and grow trust by, and that comes down to this thing about it's got to have independence. It cannot be something that is controlled by one party. It actually has to be something that becomes shared, and we have to build it together if it's going to succeed and serve everyone. But that, as I said, is where there's some really innovative things going on in different parts of the world where communities are taking a lead and driving change, even though that may not be what the centralized authorities would like to see. You're starting to see it emerge nonetheless. And it's a fascinating space to be involved with, that transformative side of digital water. But as Hamad said, we're perhaps not there yet, but we actually need to start by using the technology to improve our day-to-day management, but with an eye on the fact that really where we want to get to is the transformative power of this technology in societal terms, not just let's make sure that our water managers are doing a better job. We actually want them to go way beyond that.
So digital water, from what I understand it, is actually something that will empower communities. It'll empower people. It'll empower businesses. Um, are our municipalities ready for this kind of change, Benoit?
So thank you. My tongue is burning here because we are going to have, well, firstly, never let a good crisis go to waste. So it's an oxymoron in one sentence. But if you look at the mess we've got in Eskom, forget who caused it, the mess, we've got Eskom's a push, okay? We need the water to push. And, you know, that digital notification on your phone has changed your behavior. Yes, we're all stressed and the likes, but the stress is given. You're able to now know, I need to buy more candles today, I need to check the inverter, oof, there's rain, so the solar is not going to work as well. I plan my day and my meetings accordingly, and I'm just about to run out of battery now, but the power should come on at, well, it's African time, but it's not going to be at 4, but it's going to be very, very soon. They're getting better, it's getting closer to the hour than the half hour, and but now we don't do it in water because it's our right to have water delivered to our meter. And you know, when the water stops and the air goes, gee, that meter only revs, that people are getting upset. But you know, quite seriously, what's happening in Joburg, for example, what's happening in Tequeni and Mandela Bay, if people had that central point of truth, people believe Eskom's a push on your phone, whether it's driven by TikTok, the Chinese, the Americans, whoever, people believe that app. We need the water to push. Get to tell you not just the volume. I think the panel touched on a very important point, is we need to know the quality of the water. Everybody's asking, and then they go and buy bottled water in a plastic container and generate more issues down the line for our children and grandchildren. So, you know, let's have that information. It is available, as Fraser was talking about. It's we've got the smart sensors and the likes. We've also got artificial intelligence that can help us predict certain things. So that's been launched in eThekwini or Durban, the KZN coast. So with a few smart sensors, they started with lab, with a few smart sensors, with an algorithm, they're able to actually map what the E. coli or equivalent contaminant indicator is likely to be on the beaches up and down the KZN coast. And that's using what we call virtual sensors. So we've got a few true sensors, and then what the rest is actually derived using artificial intelligence. So why aren't we doing that? In Joburg, people are phoning and saying, where's the water? I haven't had water for 3 days here, 2 days here, and the likes. Let's put it on, let's digitize it and use those tools so that, yes, you might not have enough water, the quality might be dubious at times and things like that. Have the information, make a plan, plan your day accordingly. That takes a lot of stress out of us. And I think this is where, you know, going to what Armand said, there's no policy restrictions. The latest national water resource strategy that was released for comment end of last year talks very specifically about digital water data and the fourth industrial and the fifth industrial revolution and the likes. So we've got all this in place, but you know what? It's talk. We need to implement it now, but the only people who can drive that is us. It's society, it's those who are affected the most, and those who can, and then business associations and active citizens. And we see there's a lot more in the media on water at the moment because of load shedding, but the water problem has been here for 20 years. Load shedding has been for 10. Load shedding makes it look worse, and now the two together is actually quite a difficult concoction to try and adapt. But if it doesn't like this word, but the digital toolbox is, or digital water is a very, very good way of helping us to manage. You can't manage what you can't measure. That old saying of 40 years ago, still this is actually more important now. And with digital tools, we're able to actually measure lives. So we won't get the green or blue drop or no drop 2 years after the actual measurement or audit was done, because that's what it is. Okay. In 2020, we do the audit. We compile the reports in 21, we publish in 2022. We can get these things live on our phones now. Okay, and the lag at most of some of the water quality criteria could be 48 hours, 72 hours, you know, and the likes. But there's no excuse to do it. But it can only really happen if we as society believe that water is important. I believe we take it for granted.
Wow, thanks very much for that, Benoit. And I really like the analogy. Sort of, you know, we all used to Eskom's a push. and it helps us make intelligent day-to-day decisions with regard to how we engage with the power utility and how we engage with electricity. And so I think that sort of makes it a lot more real for the rest of us, is how can we do something similar with water? Does that mean, and Hamad, I'm going to ask you that question if you don't mind, does that mean that we could look at more equitable distribution of water if we are aware of what is available and what quality is available, and if everybody can see the data, will that help us ensure that water becomes more available in areas where it isn't?
Yeah, indeed, Brigetti. Definitely. You see, if I give you a simple example of how the water sector works in South Africa, in the value chain, we've got the department, right? The national department, who is the custodian of all water resources. So a water utility, or what we refer to as a water service provider, a utility would buy the water from the nearest river source. In the case of Gauteng, it would be Rand Water, who pays the government for the purchase of the water. Mind you, that contract is set despite the quality. So it doesn't matter what the quality of that water is, the price is set. Here is a question I've asked for many, many, many years, but that just happens to be a fact. So you buy the water from the government. So the government should be looking after the catchment. The government should be financing the Lesotho Highlands scheme in order to make sure there's ongoing water provision. Fine. Then Rand Water takes the water, they purify it, then they distribute it as a wholesaler to Johannesburg Water, who's one of the customers. Now, Johannesburg Water, once it receives it, it then distributes it to households, right? Then you, at the end of the line at the tap, receive it at your household. From where you're sitting as a consumer, you don't have water. So you ask the question, why am I not getting water? So then your municipality tells you about their challenge. And then they include the challenge that they're receiving not enough water from the wholesaler, who's the utility. So the consumer is in many ways in the dark. If you had a transparent picture of the total water availability, the amount that is being purified, for example, where that water is being distributed by your municipality, you will then be so enlightened that you can see and you can seek equity in terms of this distribution. This is right now the biggest challenge of municipalities. With the limited amount of water they will receive from a water utility, how do they distribute that water in an equitable fashion so that people in high-lying areas are not sacrificed, or people in low-lying areas are not sacrificed? This digitization process, if done on an integrated basis, will give us all the entire picture. And to take it to one more level very quickly, if you in your house want to really spend your effort saving water, which is in the national interest, you want to know which devices in your house are using lots of water. So you can be empowered via an app to determine, wow, my shower is actually using more water than I should. Maybe I should use a low shower rose, so to say, which will half the amount of water I use. Or my washing is taking too much water, or my swimming pool is the problem here. You empower people with data so that they can make intelligent choices and they can contribute to preserving a scarce resource and coming forward with solutions that we're all looking forward to.
Thanks very much for that, Hamad. And I think I want to give Blue Yeti a shout out and say thank you to them for my inverter. And I've learned a lot, just listening to you guys talking about data and the value of data. I've learned a lot about the appliances in my home because of my inverter, because it gives me data and I can make more intelligent choices. And I think, this conversation today was incredibly valuable because it has helped to lift the lid and demystify what digital water is and how it can benefit the ordinary person in the street and help us make effective, smart choices, smart water, smart choices. We are almost at the top of the hour, so can we do a round robin and just do a sort of summary Dr. Fraser McLeod, can I start with you? And then we'll go to Fred, Benoit, and Hamant, if that's okay.
Yeah, thanks, Brigitte. I mean, digital water is never an easy thing to summarise, or the whole issues. But the way I view it is quite simple: is yes, data and digital technology will help us manage our water systems better today. But the real opportunity of digital water is through empowering the community through a transformative water processes into the future. That is when we will realise the full benefit of digital water. Is when the data that communities need is actually arriving directly with communities, so they can actually fundamentally drive change. They are the ones who are most impacted by the water problems, and they're the ones who are best placed to do something about it. And that's where digital water is going to play its biggest role in the longer term.
Thanks very much, and a special shout out to you for being our guest today on the show. We really do appreciate your time.
It's been my pleasure. It's always a pleasure to talk water with interested parties anywhere in the world.
Thank you. Fred, over to you.
Thanks, Brigitte. Yeah, I think the whole issue of digital water, we're currently in a situation where we understand we've got lots of problems, we've got to deal with them. We've got a horizon because many of these problems need to be dealt with in terms of engineering projects, etc., etc. But we also need immediate interventions in order to be able to start addressing where we are. So what is critical is how do we use data and digitization to optimize what we currently have? How do we make sure that what we have is operating at the maximum? How do we provide information to people so that they can make informed decisions with regards to their behavior? And how do we attract or determine some and start putting a value to water so that people value that resource? And for me, that is the critical impact that digitization can have and should have. We've seen data digitization impact every aspect of our life, and we've seen every other industry being, impacted by data, the use of big data, the digitization, and we see that the benefits of that every day, and we now need to start seeing the benefits of that available technology within the water sector, so that we can start easing the immediate problems while ensuring that there's a long-term strategy in place to address the problems that we face.
Thanks very much, Fred. And Benoit, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Fraser, for joining us. It's really nice to have you and the rest of our panel and Brigitte organizing. And yes, let's use the digital toolbox to match our water and electricity scarcities and artificial intelligence so that we struggle a lot less and make our lives a bit more bearable. It's very easy to do, in actual fact. The technology is there. So let's start digitizing. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks very much, Benoit. And if we may hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Brigitte. You know, in Gauteng in particular, and largely in South Africa, water supply was taken for granted for just over 1 century. We had no challenges with water supply, by and large, for a century. Now that we have a challenge, people take it seriously. Secondly, the other aspect that was not respected or taken seriously, and there's no blame on consumers. You take it for granted, and this element is water quality. People only have a problem when they have a problem with water quality. Otherwise, it's taken for granted. You open the tap and you drink the water. So my final words would be, if you want people to help you to solve this problem, then empower them via digitization so that they can change their behavior through adopting digitization, which is exactly what is happening with electricity now. And in that way, they will help you to conquer a problem, because without their support, we're not going to overcome this problem in this country. Thank you.
Thanks very, very much, everyone. And again, a special thank you to our guest, Dr. Fraser McLeod. You are watching the Water Hour, and our conversation today was about digital water. If you are watching the show on the replay, please feel free to leave a comment or a suggestion, and we would appreciate that. So again, thank you for joining us live today, and thank you if you're catching the show on the replay. Until next time, we'll see you on the next episode of the Water Hour.